Marina Holt sat at the grand oak dining table, the air thick with the scent of her father's signature filet mignon, and the underlying tension that had been present at every family gathering for as long as she could remember. Across from her, Gregory Holt, the patriarch of Holt Associates, cut into his steak with the same precision he used to dismantle any hope she had of being seen as his equal. "Not everyone is meant for the big leagues, Marina," he said, his voice casual yet sharp enough to slice through the lively conversation around them. "Jonathan has the instincts for the business. He knows how to command a room, and that's why he's going to lead this firm into the future." Marina set down her fork, her fingers tightening under the table as her older brother Jonathan smirked at her in that all-too-familiar way. The heir to Holt Associates had always basked in the glow of their father's approval, a golden child who thrived on charm and bravado more than actual skill. Their younger sister, Elena, lounged on the opposite side of the table, idly scrolling through her phone, only half listening to the conversation. She had never needed to prove herself. Her life revolved around lavish brunches, high-profile social events, and influencer deals that kept her firmly in the public eye. Marina had played this game before, sitting quietly as Gregory and Jonathan dominated the discussion, discussing multi-million-dollar contracts, skyscraper designs, and the firm's legacy, as if she weren't even there. She had spent years trying to earn her father's approval, believing that if she worked harder, excelled academically, and pushed herself beyond exhaustion, she would finally be recognized. She graduated top of her class, secured prestigious internships, and brought fresh, innovative ideas to the table. But none of it had ever been enough. Her father dismissed her as too cautious, too quiet, lacking the so-called killer instinct needed to survive in the ruthless world of architecture and real estate. The irony was that Marina had the vision, the intelligence, and the talent. She just didn't fit into the image of success her father had carefully curated. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur, Jonathan boasting about a new corporate complex deal he had sealed, though Marina had heard whispers that the project was already running over budget and behind schedule. Gregory nodded approvingly, pushing the conversation back to Jonathan every time Marina even attempted to speak. Her contributions, her ideas, her voice, none of it mattered. Holt Associates had already decided who was worth listening to, and Marina was nothing more than an afterthought. She knew, deep down, that no matter how much she achieved, she would never be enough in their eyes. But as Marina pushed her barely touched plate away and looked around the table, a realization settled over her. She didn't need their approval anymore. Maybe she had spent her entire life trying to prove herself to the wrong people. Maybe it was time to stop trying altogether. As Jonathan raised a glass in self-congratulation and her father beamed with pride, Marina sat back in her chair, a quiet determination taking root. She didn't say anything, she didn't argue, she simply decided. She was done waiting for recognition. If her family refused to see her worth, she would build something of her own, something they would never be able to ignore. Marina sat in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Holt Associates, her hands resting on a neatly organized stack of documents. This was her moment, the culmination of months of research, late nights, and meticulous planning. The proposal in front of her detailed an innovative urban redevelopment project that would transform a neglected district into a thriving, sustainable community. It wasn't just another high-riser or commercial complex. It was a vision for the future, one that blended green architecture, modern living spaces, and economic revitalization. She had run the numbers over and over, consulted industry experts, and mapped out every logistical challenge. All she needed now was for someone to listen. But as she took a breath to present her findings, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smirk already forming. "Marina, we've been over this before," he interrupted before she could even finish her second sentence. "That location is a dead zone. It's been tried before and it failed. There's no point sinking money into a project that won't bring immediate returns." He gave her that patronizing grin, the same one she had seen at the dinner table, at family events, and in nearly every boardroom discussion. "You're overcomplicating things." Marina clenched her jaw, but she wasn't finished yet. "I understand your concerns," she countered, keeping her voice even, professional. "But the problem isn't the location. It's the approach. Previous developments failed because they didn't consider long-term community integration. If we focus on sustainable infrastructure and mixed-use zoning..." Gregory Holt let out a bored sigh and waved a hand dismissively, cutting her off. "If Jonathan says it's not worth pursuing, then it's not worth pursuing. We have bigger deals on the table. Next item." And just like that, her weeks of work were erased in an instant. The conversation moved on as if she hadn't spoken at all. She sat there, her face burning, her fingers tightening around the pen in her lap. This wasn't the first time this had happened. It was always the same. Jonathan spoke, and Gregory nodded. Marina spoke, and the room barely noticed. She had spent years proving herself, showing them that she wasn't just some naive idealist, but they had already made up their minds about her. She looked around the table at the senior partners, the other architects, the project managers. No one challenged the decision. No one acknowledged her plan or even asked for the details. Her expertise meant nothing. Her ideas, her vision, her ambition, they weren't just rejected, they were ignored. That evening, as she packed up her notes, she felt something shift inside her. Enough. If her family refused to see her potential, then she would stop trying to convince them. She would take her knowledge, her talent, and her drive somewhere else, not to another firm, not to another company that would undervalue her. She would build her own. But she had to be smart about it. Walking away too soon would make her a target. If she left now, Gregory would pull every string he had to ensure she never found footing in the industry. Jonathan would mock her, claiming she couldn't handle the pressure. No, she needed to make her move in the shadows, to build something without them even realizing it. As she walked out of the conference room, the sound of Jonathan's laughter still ringing in the background, Marina no longer felt angry. She felt determined. They had dismissed her for the last time. The next time her father and brother spoke about the future of architecture, they wouldn't just hear her name, they would see it, towering above them in the skyline. Marina knew she couldn't just walk away from Holt Associates, not yet. If she left too soon, her father would block her from industry connections, ruin her reputation, and make sure no firm in the city took her seriously. So, she played the long game. By day, she remained the dutiful, overlooked Holt sibling, attending meetings, watching her brother fumble through decisions, and quietly observing where their family firm was making mistakes. But by night, she was laying the foundation for something bigger, her own firm, Horizon Studios. Her first real step came when she met Daniel Reyes, an ambitious architect with a sharp eye for urban revitalization projects. They were introduced through a mutual acquaintance, and from the moment they started talking, Marina knew she had found the perfect partner. Daniel had the charisma and industry connections she lacked, while Marina had the vision and strategic mind to turn ideas into reality. More importantly, he understood what it meant to be underestimated. "They look at me and see another flashy designer," he admitted over coffee one evening. "But I know how to build things that last." That was all Marina needed to hear. They would build something together, something that would outlast Holt and Associates. The first project was a run-down warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a property no one else saw value in. Much like Marina herself, it was all she could afford with her limited savings, but where others saw decay, she saw potential. On weekends, she was there painting walls, replacing fixtures, sketching out blueprints at a makeshift desk. She worked tirelessly, learning the hands-on parts of development that Holt Associates had always delegated to contractors. Every hammer swing, every design revision, every late night spent running calculations was proof that she was capable of standing on her own. Within a year, they flipped the warehouse into a modern co-working space, a sleek hub for young entrepreneurs, artists, and startups. The renovation cost had been minimal, but the returns? Incredible. Marina and Daniel used the profits to acquire another property, then another. Horizon Studios was no longer just an idea, it was becoming a competitor. The hardest part was keeping it a secret. Marina still had to show up at Holt Associates, pretending to be the same overlooked daughter her family had always dismissed. She endured Jonathan's smug grins, Gregory's cold indifference, and Elena's oblivious chatter about high society events, all while knowing that outside of their bubble, she was becoming a force in the architectural world. Still, she and Daniel had a strategy. Marina remained invisible in the public eye, ensuring her name wasn't tied to Horizon Studios. Daniel became the face of the firm, taking interviews, shaking hands at industry events, and networking with investors. Meanwhile, Marina stayed behind the scenes, making the real decisions, drafting blueprints, securing contracts, and strategically acquiring overlooked properties. Slowly but surely, Horizon Studios began winning bids, some of them against Holt Associates. The irony wasn't lost on Marina. The company that had dismissed her ideas was now losing projects to the very vision they had refused to acknowledge. One evening, as she sat in her small, cluttered office at Horizon Studios, Daniel walked in and placed a bottle of whiskey on her desk, along with a stack of financial reports. "Take a break, Holt," he said with a grin. "We're officially in the black, and we just closed another deal, one that Jonathan's team lost." Marina stared at the numbers, a slow smile spreading across her face. This was only the beginning. Holt Associates had no idea who they were competing against. Not yet, but soon, they would. Horizon Studios was no longer just an ambitious startup. It was a rising powerhouse in the architectural world. Within a few short years, Marina and Daniel had built something remarkable, taking on projects that Holt Associates wouldn't even consider, and turning them into gold mines. What set them apart was their visionary approach. While traditional firms focused on flashy skyscrapers and predictable corporate buildings, Horizon Studios specialized in revitalizing neglected spaces, creating sustainable communities, and reimagining urban landscapes. Investors took notice. Clients raved about their designs. At Holt Associates, the tension was growing. Jonathan was furious. Deals he had been certain were in the bag were slipping through his fingers, and his father, Gregory, was beginning to take notice. "Who the hell is running this firm?" Jonathan grumbled one evening after losing yet another high-profile bid. "No one's even heard of them 5 years ago, and now they're taking our contracts?" Gregory frowned, flipping through reports, but no matter how many times they analyzed the competition, they never thought to look at Marina. In their eyes, she was still the forgotten middle child, someone who had faded into irrelevance the moment she stopped actively participating in their firm. And that was exactly how Marina wanted it. She continued to play her role at family gatherings, sitting quietly while Jonathan ranted about shady newcomers in the industry, nodding along as Gregory dismissed Horizon Studios as nothing more than a passing trend. Inside, she was smiling. Every deal she won, every project she secured, was another step toward proving, not to them, but to herself, that she had never needed their validation. But with success came risk. As Horizon Studios' reputation grew, so did curiosity about the people behind it. Marina had gone to great lengths to keep her name out of public records. Daniel was the firm's public face, handling interviews and networking. But whispers were beginning to circulate. How had a small firm managed to outperform legacy powerhouses in just a few years? who was really behind its rapid success. One evening, as Marina sat reviewing blueprints in her office, Daniel walked in, arms crossed, a knowing smirk on his face. "It's only a matter of time before they put it together," he said, dropping a magazine on her desk. The headline read, "Horizon Studios, the firm redefining modern architecture and beating industry giants at their own game." Marina exhaled slowly, staring at the article. The world was watching. The illusion of invisibility wouldn't last forever. She glanced up at Daniel and smirked. Let them wonder. The grand ballroom of the Lexington Hotel shimmered with elegance. A sea of black tie-clad architects, developers, and industry power players gathered under the dazzling chandeliers. It was the event of the year. A place where deals were made over champagne and legacies were cemented with awards. For Gregory and Jonathan Holt, the annual Architectural Excellence Awards Gala was nothing short of a tradition, an evening where Holt Associates could showcase its dominance and remind the industry why it had been a leader for decades. They had attended every year, expecting recognition, expecting prestige, but this year would be different. Marina hadn't planned on attending. Gala events weren't her thing. She preferred the quiet satisfaction of a job well done over the empty performance of industry politics. But Daniel insisted. "Come on, Holt," he had said, tossing an elegant black dress onto her couch a few nights before. "We've earned this. Besides, I'd pay good money to see the look on your brother's face when he realizes what's coming." She had hesitated but ultimately agreed. If Horizon Studios was going to make a statement, tonight was the night. As Marina entered the ballroom, she immediately spotted her family across the room. Jonathan stood near the bar, drink in hand, laughing with a group of industry elites, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Gregory, ever the composed businessman, was locked in conversation with another CEO, oblivious to the storm brewing in the background. Elena was nowhere to be seen, likely off at a high-profile fashion event instead. To them, Marina was just another guest, a forgettable presence in a room filled with people who mattered. The evening progressed with its usual pleasantries. Networking, polite conversations, a long-winded keynote speech about the future of architecture. Marina remained in the background, unnoticed, waiting for the real show to begin. Then came the awards. One by one, categories were announced. Best Commercial Project, Best Urban Redevelopment, Best Emerging. Then, the final award of the night was announced. "And now," the host said, smiling broadly, "the Award for Innovative Excellence in Urban Design, a category reserved for the firm that has truly revolutionized modern architecture. This year's winner has defied industry expectations, bringing new life to underutilized spaces and reshaping the way we think about sustainable urban development." Jonathan leaned forward, his smirk returning. This was it. The award goes to Horizon Studios. The room erupted in applause. Jonathan froze. Gregory's head snapped up, his expression unreadable. Around them, murmurs spread like wildfire. Horizon Studios? The firm that had been quietly outpacing Holt Associates? The name they had barely paid attention to? At the Horizon Studios table, Daniel grinned, standing up to accept the award. But instead of heading to the stage alone, he turned to Marina, extending a hand. A hush fell over the room. Slowly, Marina rose to her feet. She didn't hesitate. She didn't hide. She walked confidently through the sea of stunned faces, past industry titans, past former colleagues, past her father and brother, whose shock was almost comical. The woman they had dismissed for years, the so-called unambitious one, was the force behind their greatest competitor. Gregory's jaw tightened. Jonathan looked as if he had been physically struck. At the podium, Daniel adjusted the microphone, his voice warm and steady. "Thank you," he began, smiling. This recognition means the world to us. When we started Horizon Studios, we had a vision to see potential where others saw failure, to build something different, something lasting. And tonight, this award validates that vision. Polite applause followed, but then Daniel turned slightly toward Marina, and the entire room held its breath. But, he continued, this moment isn't just about Horizon Studios. It's about someone whose brilliance and determination have shaped this company from the very beginning. Someone who has spent years redefining what's possible in our industry, even when others refuse to see it. Many of you may not know her name, but you will. And then he said it. Marina Holt. The silence was deafening. Marina stepped forward, meeting Daniel's gaze before turning her attention to the audience. She wasn't afraid anymore. She could see it, the realization hitting the room like a thunderclap, the whispers, the stares, the dawning horror in Jonathan's eyes. Gregory remained motionless, his expression unreadable, but Marina knew. He understood now. Marina took the microphone, her voice steady, clear, unwavering. "Thank you," she said. "This is unexpected, but it's a testament to what can be achieved when you refuse to be overlooked." She let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "To those who believed in us, thank you." A pause, then a slight smirk. "And to those who didn't, thank you for underestimating us." The applause was deafening. From across the room, Gregory sat in stunned silence, while Jonathan looked as if he might explode. Marina didn't care. For the first time in her life, she wasn't proving herself to them. She had already won. The echoes of applause still rang in Marina's ears as she stepped off the stage, the weight of the award in her hands feeling far lighter than the moment she had just lived. She had done it. No longer a shadow in the background, no longer the overlooked Holt sibling. Her name was now known, her achievements undeniable. But as she made her way back to the Horizon Studios table, she could feel the eyes on her, the whispers, the speculation, the silent reckoning happening across the room. And at the center of it all, her father and brother sat frozen in disbelief. She didn't have to look at Jonathan to know his face was burning with fury. His entire career had been built on the idea that he was the rightful heir, the future of Holt Associates, the only one who mattered. And yet tonight, the industry was talking about her, not him. He had spent years belittling her, dismissing her ideas, pushing her into the background, only to find himself standing in her shadow. Gregory, on the other hand, was harder to read. His hands were clasped together on the table, his gaze fixed straight ahead as if replaying every interaction they had ever had. Every time he had ignored her, every opportunity he had refused to give her. His jaw tightened, his breath slow and measured. But the truth was there, plain for Marina to see. He knew. He knew that he had miscalculated, that the daughter he had underestimated was now his fiercest competitor. Marina didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The weight of the moment was enough. Sophia leaned over with a smirk, murmuring just loud enough for Marina to hear. "I'd pay good money to know what's going through your brother's head right now." Marina exhaled, allowing herself a small, knowing smile. Let him stew. But the night wasn't over yet. As the event wound down, Gregory made his move. Marina barely had time to finish a conversation with an investor before she felt a presence at her side. She turned to see him standing there, his imposing figure slightly stiff, his expression unreadable. "Marina," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "We need to talk." She hesitated for a moment, then followed him toward the terrace, leaving the glimmering ballroom behind. The cool night air was a stark contrast to the intensity inside. For the first time in years, it was just the two of them. No Jonathan, No dismissive boardrooms, no family dinner interruptions. Gregory let out a slow breath, gripping the terrace railing. "I didn't know," he admitted finally, his voice tinged with something unfamiliar, regret. "I had no idea you were capable of all this." Marina crossed her arms, her tone even. "That's because you never cared to find out." Silence stretched between them. Gregory glanced at her, then back at the city skyline. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "This industry, it's brutal. I didn't think you had the—" Marina cut him off. "The what? The vision? The intelligence? The drive?" His silence was the only answer she needed. And yet, standing there, for the first time, she didn't need his validation. His realization, his regret, they weren't the victory. The victory was that she had done this for herself. Whether or not he accepted that no longer mattered. Gregory nodded slowly, his shoulders sinking slightly. "I won't make that mistake again," he said at last. Marina didn't reply. She had already moved past him. 2 days after the gala, Marina was seated in the sleek, minimalist conference room of Horizon Studios, the company she had built from the ground up. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in a golden glow, a stark contrast to the tension thickening the air. Across from her sat Gregory Holt, the father who had spent years dismissing her, and beside him, her brother, Jonathan, whose barely contained resentment simmered beneath a carefully composed exterior. Between them lay a sealed folder Marina already knew contained a buyout offer. Gregory leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, his tone measured but firm. "We're prepared to make a generous offer to acquire Horizon Studios and bring your expertise into Holt Associates." He slid the folder across the polished wood. "We recognize the value of what you've built, Marina. We want you back." Marina let the folder sit there, untouched. She exchanged a brief glance with Daniel, who remained silent beside her, arms crossed, amusement flickering in his eyes. They had expected this. She exhaled slowly, then leaned back in her chair. "No." Jonathan scoffed. "You're not even going to look at it?" "I don't need to," she replied evenly. "There's nothing in that folder that could interest me." Gregory's expression remained unreadable, but the slight tightening of his jaw told her everything. He wasn't used to being refused. "Marina, be reasonable," he said. "This is an opportunity to merge resources, to work as a family again. You have the potential to take Holt and Associates into the future." She tilted her head, studying him. Now, suddenly, she had potential? Now that Horizon Studios had outmaneuvered them? Now that her name was on everyone's lips? She tapped her fingers lightly against the table before responding. "You had years to see my potential, to listen to my ideas, to include me. Instead, you dismissed me. And that's why I built this company, so I'd never have to ask for permission again." Jonathan clenched his jaw, his frustration slipping through his carefully controlled demeanor. "You seriously think you can compete with us long-term?" Marina smiled, calm and confident. "I don't think, Jonathan. I know." Gregory exhaled sharply, his shoulders stiff. He wasn't going to beg. He never had. And Marina had no intention of giving up everything she had built, just to fit back into the space they had once forced her into. After a long silence, Gregory nodded, closing the folder. "I underestimated you, Marina," he admitted. "I won't make that mistake again." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. As Gregory and Jonathan stood and left, Marina let out a slow breath. For the first time, she was truly free. As the door to the conference room clicked shut behind Gregory and Jonathan, Marina sat still for a moment, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. She had won, not in the way her family measured success, not through inheritance, not by proving herself to them, but by proving to herself that she never needed their approval in the first place. She had built Horizon Studios on her own terms, without shortcuts, without nepotism, and without their validation, and she wasn't looking back. Daniel let out a low chuckle beside her, shaking his head in amusement. That, he said, stretching out in his chair, was satisfying to watch. Marina smirked, finally exhaling as the last traces of tension left her shoulders. It was, wasn't it? She admitted. Years of dismissal, years of being overlooked. None of it mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was what came next. Standing up, she walked over to the window, gazing out at the skyline. The city was hers now. Not in the way Holt Associates had claimed it, through stale legacy and outdated power plays, but through innovation, vision, and persistence. The very skyline her family had once controlled was now dotted with projects bearing the mark of Horizon Studios. Projects they had deemed unworthy, risks they hadn't been willing to take. She could still hear her father's voice in her head. "Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues, Marina." She let the words linger for a second, before dismissing them entirely. She wasn't just in the big leagues, she had changed the game. Turning back to Daniel, she picked up the buyout folder Gregory had left behind and without a second thought, dropped it into the trash. "Come on," she said, her voice light, confident. "We've got work to do." Daniel grinned, standing to follow. Horizon Studios wasn't done yet. They had bigger projects to tackle, new deals to close, and a future to build. One that didn't involve looking over her shoulder or proving anything to anyone. For the first time in her life, Marina Holt wasn't chasing a place at someone else's table. She was building her own. The story of Marina Holt teaches a powerful lesson about self-worth, perseverance, and the importance of carving your own path. For years, Marina sought validation from a family that refused to see her potential. She played by their rules, hoping to earn a seat at their table, only to realize that no amount of hard work would change how they viewed her. Instead of continuing to seek approval, she shifted her focus inward, building something of her own, on her own terms. The biggest takeaway from her journey is that success doesn't come from being acknowledged by others. It comes from believing in yourself, even when no one else does. Marina didn't let rejection define her. She used it as fuel, proving that she was more than the limitations others placed on her. Another lesson is that sometimes the best revenge is success. Marina didn't need to fight or argue with her family. Her achievements spoke louder than words. By focusing on her own goals instead of trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for her, she found true freedom and fulfillment. Ultimately, the story reminds us that the path to success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right.